The sun was sinking behind the ragged line of the mesas when Clara Hawthorne guided her sorrel mare down the dusty trail that wound toward the river. The day had been a scorcher, one of those high desert afternoons when heat shimmered above the roofs of Red Hollow and the air tasted like copper. But dusk brought relief, and with it a soft lavender light settling over the plains. Clara had always loved this hour. She loved how it softened the edges of the world, how it made the harsh land look almost gentle. Almost. She rode alone tonight, which was unusual for the sheriff's daughter. Sheriff Hawthorne kept a tight watch over his only child, a fact Clara tolerated with mixed feelings. She loved her father, everyone in Red Hollow knew. He was a good man, but she longed for a taste of freedom, bigger than the town's single street and its collection of weather-beaten storefronts down by the river. Though there she could breathe. The Rio Perdido wasn't much by Eastern standards, but here it was life itself. Cottonwoods lined its banks, their leaves whispering in the evening breeze. Clara's mare picked her way toward the sound of trickling water, and Clara slipped down from the saddle, boots crunching against the pebbled shore. She removed her hat, letting long chestnut hair fall down her back. For a moment she simply watched the sky, where streaks of gold were fading into velvet blue. Then a twig snapped. Behind her Clara froze. Her hand reflexively went to the small revolver holstered at her hip, not because she was afraid, but because her father had trained her to be wary. Out here, a lone rider could encounter almost anything. Stray cattle, rattlesnakes, desperate men. "Who's there?" she called. Voice steady though her pulse quickened. A figure stepped from the shadows of the cottonwoods. Tall, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low. A man whose presence made the air shift, charged suddenly with tension, danger, or something kin to it. "It's just me," he said quietly. Clara's breath caught. She knew that voice. Jesse Thorne, outlaw gunslinger, wanted in 3 territories. And yet, for reasons she could neither name nor deny, she had never feared him. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked. Her hand eased away from the gun, though she left it holstered at the ready. "You shouldn't be within 20 miles of Red Hollow. My father would. I know what your father would do." Jesse's tone held a faint rueful smile. "Believe me, Clara, I'm not here to cause trouble." He stepped closer, and the last of the sunlight brushed across his face's strong jaw. Worn stubble, eyes so blue they looked like winter lightning. Jesse Thorne was not much older than Clara, but the world had lived hard on him. Rumors said he'd been an orphan, a ranch hand, a gambler, a man wronged by the law. Rumors also said he'd shot 2 deputy marshals in Santa Fe. Clara didn't know which stories were true. All she knew was that he carried his burdens like iron nailed to his bones. "You can't stay long," she said, more gently now. "There are bounty posters everywhere. Someone will see you." "Someone like you?" he asked. A dangerous question spoken softly. Clara swallowed. "You know I'd never turn you in." He nodded once in acknowledgement, a thank you, and something else she didn't want to name. The river murmured between them. A quiet witness. Jesse knelt at the water's edge and dipped his hands into the cool current. "I've been riding for 2 days straight. Needed a moment to rest." He glanced up at her. "Didn't expect to find you here?" "I come here most evenings," Clara said. "It's the only place I can think." "About what?" She hesitated. "About everything I'm supposed to be, everything I'm not allowed to be." Jesse's expression softened, the way it sometimes did when he forgot to guard himself. "Clara, you're allowed to be anything you want." She turned away, staring at the shimmering river. "That's easy for you to say. You live by your own rules. And you think that's freedom." Jesse rose slowly. "Running, hiding, sleeping with my gun under my head. No home, no kin. I wouldn't wish my life on anyone, least of all you." His words hung between them, heavy and honest. Clara felt the truth of them settle in her chest. Yet she also felt the same pull she had felt the first time she saw him ride into town months ago. A longing, sharp as a spur, and impossible to ignore. The shadows deepened. Fireflies blinked along the far bank. Jesse moved closer, and Clara realized she wasn't breathing. "Jesse," she whispered, "why did you really come?" He studied her with those winter-bright eyes, and for the first time she saw something break through the hard shell he wore like armor. "I had to see you," he said simply. Her heart thudded once hard. "I told myself it was foolish. I told myself to keep riding. But I kept thinking of you, standing by this river, looking like you were wishing for a world bigger than Red Hollow. And I." His breath caught, barely. "I wanted to see that look again." Clara felt the ground tilt, the river's hum fading beneath the wild rush of her heartbeat. She stepped toward him just an inch. Just enough to bridge the space their words couldn't. "Jesse," she murmured. He reached out, then stopped, his hand hovering near hers. If I cross this line, Clara, there's no going back. She looked up, meeting his gaze fully. Maybe, she said, I don't want to go back. The river whispered on, carrying their unspoken truth into the night. The next morning dawned in shades of rose and gold, but Clara Hawthorne hardly slept to see the sunrise. She spent the night pacing her small room above the sheriff's office, replaying every word spoken by the River Jaycee's voice, quiet and raw. The way his hand had hovered near hers as if he feared the consequences of touching her. She'd been bold, bolder than she ever imagined she could be. She had stepped toward him, invited him, and then he was gone. Not abruptly or rudely. Jesse had slipped back into the shadows the moment he heard distant hoofbeats along the ridge. Someone's riding late, he'd murmured. And just like that, he had faded into the darkness, the night swallowing him whole. Now daylight streamed through the single window as Clara braided her hair with a restless frustration. She had to keep her composure. The town was already stirring. Voices echoed from the street below ranch, hands trading gossip, shopkeepers sweeping wooden porches, the familiar clatter of wagons rolling in from nearby homesteads. She stepped down the wooden stairs to find her father, Sheriff Thomas Hawthorne, hunched over his desk, scanning a stack of wanted posters. He glanced up. "Mornin', Clara, you're up early." Which, from him, was a suspicious observation. "I couldn't sleep," she said, hoping her voice sounded neutral. She poured herself coffee strong, black, gritty and forced a slow sip. The sheriff rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Lotta talk in town this morning. Folks say Jesse Thorne's been spotted near the river." Clara's pulse stuttered, but her face remained still. She'd learned from her father how to hold a poker-straight expression. "Rumors," she said lightly. "People around here scare easy." Her father grunted. "Maybe, but the governor's doubled the reward on him. A man with a bounty that big doesn't go unnoticed." He held up the newest poster. Jesse's face stared back hard, shadowed, too dangerous to resemble the man who had stood hesitant and vulnerable beside her last night. Beneath his likeness, the list of charges stretched long: armed robbery, evasion, suspected murder. Some were exaggerated, some were lies. Clara had heard enough stories to know the law was a complicated thing, out west. Sheriff Hawthorne studied his daughter for a long moment. "You ever cross paths with that boy back when he passed through Red Hollow?" Her heart jolted. "Why would you ask that? You were there at the saloon that day. You looked surprised to see him." Heat crept up Clara's neck. "Pa, I was surprised. Everyone was. Outlaws don't usually ride into town in the middle of daylight." The sheriff sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Clara, I know you're restless. I know this place feels small to you, but men like Jesse, men with a past, they're not the answer you're looking for." Clara gripped her coffee mug until her knuckles whitened. "I never said they were." He gave her a weary smile. "You don't have to say it. I know you." She wasn't sure whether that comforted her or made her chest tighten. If he truly knew her, he would know she had already crossed a line she could no longer uncross. That evening, Clara rode out again, this time with her heart hammering far faster than the mare beneath her. She headed for the river, scanning the shadows of the cottonwoods, her breath catching at every glimmer of movement. "Jesse," she whispered it into the dusk. No answer. She waited, squinting against the dying light. The river trickled on, implacable, its surface reflecting slivers of fading gold. She was about to turn back when a figure appeared on the opposite bank. Relief washed over her so fierce she nearly lost her breath. Jesse stepped forward, hands resting casually at his belt. Though Clara knew that casual stance hid a readiness to run or draw at the slightest threat. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. Her chest tightened. "You shouldn't have either." "I had to," he replied. "Wanted to see you again? But I didn't mean for you to get dragged into my troubles." Clara stepped closer to the water's edge. "Your troubles aren't what concern me, but the rumors are spreading. My father's looking for you." Jesse exhaled a curse under his breath. "Yeah, I figured. The sheriff's a smart man. Smarter than most I've had chase me." "Then why stay near Red Hollow?" Jesse hesitated long enough that Clara felt the answer before he spoke it. "You know why?" Her breath hitched. "You said last night," he went on, "that you were tired of being told what you're allowed to be." "Well, I'm tired of being told what I already am." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" "Townsfolk see me as a thief, a killer, an outlaw." "Most of it ain't true, Clara. But once the world pins a name on you, it sticks tighter than a brand." She saw the exhaustion in him, then a weight carried for too long. His shoulders hunched, as if bracing against a storm. "Jesse," she said softly, "you can tell me the truth." He looked at her, eyes fierce and lonely. "That's the problem. You're the only one I want to tell." The river wind stirred, sweeping through the cottonwoods with a sigh like an ancient lament. Jesse stepped closer, stopping only when the water lapped at his boots. "Clara," he said, voice low, "if I'm going to run, I need to know something first." She swallowed. "What?" His gaze locked with hers, vulnerable and daring all at once. "Did you mean it? Last night when you said you didn't want to go back?" Clara's heart surged, unbidden and unstoppable. "Yes," she whispered. "I meant every word." Jesse closed his eyes for a heartbeat, as if steadying himself. "Then God help us both," he murmured, "because I don't think I can walk away anymore." The first stars blinked overhead, the river shimmered between them, but the distance felt smaller, now fragile, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Clara took a breath and stepped into the water. The next few days were a delicate dance along the edge of danger. Clara Hawthorne found herself returning to the river as if pulled by an unseen hand. And Jesse Thorne appeared with a quiet regularity that both thrilled and terrified her. Every encounter carried the tension of secrets, of risks that could topple both of their worlds. Yet, in that liminal space between the water and the whispering cottonwoods, neither of them could resist the gravity that drew them together. Clara's mornings remained dominated by her father's watchful eye. Sheriff Thomas Hawthorne noticed her lingering glances toward the horizon, the faint traces of worry in her smile, the way her thoughts seemed to drift before she spoke. He said nothing at first, but the tension in his jaw and the subtle tightening of his eyes betrayed his concern. He had trained Clara in sharpness and self-reliance, but he had not trained her to resist the allure of men like Jesse Thorne. Jesse, on the other hand, carried the weight of the outside world. Wanted posters, bounty hunters, and the law's relentless shadow hovered over him constantly. Every step he took in Red Hollow was measured, calculated, yet his heart found moments of reckless abandon whenever he was near Clara. She had become the axis around which his world tilted, a singular force that made him consider possibilities he had long abandoned, a life where danger might be shared, instead of endured alone. One evening, Clara waited at the riverbank as the sun dipped low. Her hands absent-mindedly traced the worn leather of her satchel, the edges fraying from years of use. The water reflected the fiery sky, and the soft murmur of the current carried an almost sacred serenity. Jesse appeared from the shadows, moving with his usual silent grace. But tonight he carried something else, a tension that made Clara's stomach coil. "I found a place," he said without preamble, voice low, eyes scanning the horizon as if he expected trouble to leap from the trees. "Somewhere we can be. Away from the bounty hunters, the sheriffs, the gossiping tongues." Clara's pulse quickened. "Where?" she asked. She could imagine many places. Hidden canyons, abandoned homesteads, the edges of far-off mesas where no one dared to wander. But a place with Jesse meant stepping into the unknown. And stepping into the unknown meant stepping outside the life her father had built for her. "North of the ridge, past the old mill," Jesse said, "there's a cabin, abandoned, but it'll do for now. Just long enough for us to think, plan, be together without looking over our shoulders every moment." She hesitated, weighing duty against desire. Her father's face flashed before her mind's eye, the lines of worry, the sternness that had always shielded her. She knew he would never forgive her if he discovered her. And yet, the pull of Jesse's hand in hers, the warmth in his eyes, the quiet promise of freedom, it was irresistible. "I'll go," she whispered finally, determination threading through her voice. Tonight, they rode hard as shadows thickened around the river bend. Jesse led, careful to follow trails known only to him. Clara clung to the reins of her horse with one hand, the other occasionally brushing against Jesse's arm. The contact was electric, a spark that left her skin tingling. Yet neither spoke of their growing affection. Words were too fragile, too dangerous when every glance could betray them. The cabin emerged like a secret revelation, its weathered boards and crooked chimney offering the illusion of safety. Jesse slid down from his horse, helping Clara with a gentle steadiness that belied the fire in his eyes. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and old wood, but to Clara it felt like a sanctuary. Here, away from the eyes of Red Hollow, they could exist in a world of their own making. Even if just for a fleeting night. Jesse lit a small lantern, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Clara sat on a worn bench, the gravity of their situation pressing against her chest. She wanted to ask questions about his past, his fears, his plans, but the words lodged in her throat, trapped by the enormity of what they were sharing. Jesse knelt beside her, resting a hand on her knee. "Clara, I've lived my life on the run. I've trusted few, loved fewer, and yet here I am, wanting to share my world with you. Even though it's dangerous, even though it could cost everything. Her breath caught. And I want to share it with you, she admitted softly. But what about my father? What about Red Hollow? We can't just disappear. I know, Jessie said, eyes searching hers. I'm not suggesting that we abandon everything. I'm saying, for a moment, for however long we can, we exist for ourselves. Not for the law, not for your father, not for anyone but us. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent her life obeying, restraining, following rules meant to protect her, but in Jessie's presence she felt the raw pull of choice, real, urgent choice. And in that choice, she realized the depth of her feelings, the danger of denying them, and the courage it demanded. They sat in silence for a long moment, the lantern flickering, the river murmuring in the distance. Finally, Jessie reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from Clara's face. His fingers lingered, a touch that carried the weight of longing and the promise of more. She leaned into him, allowing herself the vulnerability she had denied for so long. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of sage and wildflowers. Inside the cabin, the world narrowed to two hearts that had found each other against impossible odds. The law, the bounty hunters, the unforgiving terrain of the West. All of it seemed to fade, if only for a night, in the quiet intimacy of shared presence. Yet even as they sat together, aware of the fragile bubble they had created, the shadows of the outside world lingered. Danger was never far in the West, and love, no matter how profound, had to contend with the realities of survival. But for now, in the quiet glow of the lantern, Jessie and Clara allowed themselves to simply exist, to souls bound by the river, by the wilderness, and by the unspoken truth of their hearts. And for that night, the world could wait. The dawn came slow and heavy over Red Hollow, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet and orange. In the cabin north of the ridge, Clara awoke to the faint creak of the floorboards beneath Jessie's boots. He had already saddled the horses and was checking their supplies. His movements were precise, measured, a man accustomed to danger, yet tethered now by the fragile thread of love he'd found with her. Clara dressed quickly, brushing her hair and tucking it under her hat. Every moment here, away from the law, felt like borrowed time. Her heart pounded as she stepped outside, the desert air crisp and biting, carrying the scent of pine and distant mesquite. Jessie's eyes found hers, dark and intense, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. They both knew what this day demanded: caution, planning, and an unflinching awareness that their idol was fragile. "We need to move," Jessie said quietly, voice carrying a weight that made her stomach twist. "Red Hollow's sheriff isn't blind. Bounty hunters and deputies will be searching, especially after sightings near the river. If they catch us together." His hand brushed hers in a fleeting touch that sent warmth through her despite the chill. "We'll both be in danger." Clara swallowed the knot of fear rising in her throat. "We can't stay here forever," she admitted. "But if we leave now, we risk being spotted on the trail." Jessie nodded. "I have a plan. We head east through the canyon. It's rough terrain, but few travel it, and it'll buy us time. From there, we can decide whether to lie low or—" He let the words trail, unspoken but heavy with possibilities. The ride through the canyon was silent except for the occasional snort of their horses and the grinding of hooves against the rocky soil. The towering walls closed in around them, a labyrinth of jagged stone and shadowed crevices. Jessie led the way with unerring confidence, the trail known only to him, while Clara clung to the reins, heart hammering both from the thrill and the fear of being caught. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. They stopped near a narrow stream, hidden by a cluster of juniper trees, to rest and drink. Clara studied Jessie as he tended to the horses, the way he moved with quiet authority, always alert. Danger followed him like a shadow, yet there was tenderness in the way he regarded her, a softness reserved for no one else. "Clara," Jessie began, voice low, carrying the weight of unspoken truths. "I need you to understand something. My life, it isn't easy. I've made choices, some you may never forgive, and I can't promise a future free of trouble. Not out here, not anywhere." She met his gaze without flinching. "I know, but I also know that my heart doesn't care about the dangers or the law. I care about you. And right now, that has to be enough." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, the stoic facade slipped, revealing the vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "You're brave," he said simply, "braver than most people I've met." Clara allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. "Someone has to be." They rode again, deeper into the canyon, where the sun's rays barely touched the ground. The landscape became wilder, more untamed. Boulders jutted from the cliffs, and twisted brush scratched at their sleeves. Yet, for all the roughness, There was a raw beauty that mirrored the tumult of their hearts. They had found each other in a world that sought to keep them apart, and now, in these remote canyons, they were free at least for a little while. But freedom in the West was always fragile. By late afternoon, as they emerged from the canyon into a sun-baked plain, Jesse froze. His hand went to his gun, eyes scanning the horizon. Clara followed his gaze and saw dust rising in the distance, horses, men, the unmistakable shapes of lawmen and bounty hunters moving fast. Closing in. They're here, Jesse said, voice tight. We've been followed. They must have trailed us from Red Hollow. Panic flickered in Clara's chest, but she swallowed it down. What do we do? Jesse's eyes softened as they met hers. We hold together. No matter what happens, we don't split up. Trust me. His fingers brushed hers in a brief, grounding touch. We can make it. The pursuers drew closer, and the reality of the West pressed down on them with ruthless clarity. Jesse urged his horse into a faster pace, Clara following, hearts pounding like the thunder of hooves against the hard earth. They ducked behind outcroppings, used the natural folds of the land to conceal their movements, moving with the precision of those who had lived with danger their entire lives. Clara's mind raced. Every choice carried consequences not just for Jesse, but for her family. And yet, even as the law closed in, she realized something she could not deny. Fear had no hold over her when she was with him. The risk, the tension, the uncertainty, it only amplified the pull of what they shared. As twilight fell, casting long shadows over the plain, Jesse guided them to a narrow ravine. The walls rose sharply on either side, a natural fortress. Here, he whispered, we lay low until nightfall. Then we keep moving. Clara nodded, gripping his arm for a brief instant. In that fleeting touch, they communicated everything. Fear, trust, and the unspoken truth that had begun by the river hearts bound. No matter the danger. Night fell, and the stars blinked down over the canyon like silent witnesses. The distant sound of hooves faded as the pursuers moved past, unaware of the lovers hidden within the shadows. In the fragile safety of the ravine, Clara and Jesse allowed themselves a brief moment of reprieve. They sat close together, the firelight flickering across their faces. For all the danger and uncertainty, for all the weight of the law and the world outside, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. The next morning broke with a haze of dust and sunlight, filtering through the jagged walls of the ravine. Clara awoke to the sharp metallic taste of adrenaline lingering in her mouth. Outside, the desert wind stirred loose sand across the rocky ground. Jesse was already awake, crouched near the horses, scanning the horizon as if the threat of bounty hunters would emerge from the shadows at any moment. Clara rose silently, brushing the dust from her skirt. She had grown accustomed to this life over the past few days, constant vigilance, measured movements, and the ever-present thrum of danger. But the thrill, the closeness to Jesse, and the quiet intensity of their bond made the hardships feel almost secondary. Almost. Morning, she whispered, stepping closer. Jesse turned, and for a brief instant, the danger melted from his eyes, replaced by warmth. Morning, he replied, voice low. We've got a long day ahead. If we want to stay ahead of Red Hollow's men, we need to move before it gets too hot. Clara nodded. I'm ready. They mounted their horses and moved eastward, following Jesse's intimate knowledge of hidden trails and narrow gullies. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated by the soft clatter of hooves and the occasional murmur of shared observation. Clara's mind wandered to her father, Sheriff Hawthorne, and the life she had left behind. The thought gnawed at her, a persistent ache that mingled with her longing for Jesse. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly as they rode, breaking the fragile silence. Choosing this life on the run. Jesse glanced at her, his jaw tight. Regret isn't something I allow myself, he admitted. I've made my choices. Every step I've taken led me here to you. I don't regret that, but every day out here, I wonder if one wrong move could cost us everything. Clara reached out, brushing a hand along his arm. I'm not afraid, she said, though her chest tightened with every shadowed turn. I want this. I want us. He exhaled, a short, almost humorless laugh. You're brave, Clara Hawthorne, more than you realize, but bravery isn't always enough to outrun the law. The afternoon sun climbed high, relentless and unforgiving. They paused at the edge of a rocky plateau to rest, and Jesse carefully checked their supplies: water, ammunition, and the small provisions they had managed to carry. Clara watched him, the weight of his world reflected in his careful movements, and felt a surge of admiration and fear intertwined. Clara, Jesse said suddenly, turning to her, we need to talk about what happens next. We can't hide forever. The law will catch up. and staying together means taking risks neither of us can fully control." Her heart lurched. "Are you saying we should stop?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I'm saying we need a plan. If we want a future, we have to think beyond running from one canyon to the next. I can't promise we'll be safe, but I can promise I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." Clara swallowed hard, the truth of his words settling like stones in her chest. She had dreamed of freedom, of love unbound by the constraints of her father's law or the townsfolk's gossip, but freedom came at a cost. And Jesse's world demanded courage beyond what she had imagined. "I'm with you," she said finally, "no matter what comes." A faint breeze stirred the plateau, carrying the scent of sage and distant pine. They sat together in silence, the enormity of their commitment pressing against them. Even in the beauty of the desert, danger lurked, a constant reminder that love in the West was never simple, never safe. By late afternoon, they resumed their journey, the sun sinking low as shadows stretched across the landscape. Jesse led them toward a narrow pass he knew well, a shortcut that could put them several miles ahead of any pursuers. But as they entered the pass, a sudden movement caught Jesse's eye. "Down!" he hissed. Clara dove behind a boulder as a band of mounted men appeared at the pass entrance. They wore the unmistakable badges of Red Hollow deputies, and a few carried rifles aimed with deadly precision. Jesse's hand hovered over his gun, calculating, measuring the risk. "Clara," he murmured, "stay low. Don't move unless I tell you." Her heart hammered in her chest as the deputies rode past, scanning the rocks for signs of movement. Jesse's eyes narrowed, and in a heartbeat, he had led them through the narrow crevices, keeping them hidden in the shadowed recesses of the canyon. When the danger passed, Clara exhaled a shaky breath. Jesse's hand found hers, a brief anchor in the chaos. "See," he said softly, "we can survive, but it's only going to get harder." Clara nodded, the reality of their life together settling over her like the desert night. Love in this land was a gamble, a choice made with open eyes and a willing heart, and for the first time, she realized that no matter the danger, she would not turn back, not from Jesse, not from the life they were forging together. As night fell, they camped under a canopy of stars, the vast silence of the West enveloping them. The fire flickered between them, and in its warm glow, they held each other close. Hearts bound by shared peril and unspoken promises. The law might be relentless, the bounty hunters might never stop, and the world outside the canyon might demand a choice. But for this night, Clara and Jesse existed only for each other, two hearts defiant against the harshness of the West. And in the quiet, as the desert whispered around them, they allowed themselves to dream of a future where love could endure, no matter the odds. The sun rose over the horizon in a pale wash of gold and crimson, spilling light across the rugged expanse of the West. Clara awoke to the familiar sound of the river, faint and persistent, a reminder of the place where it had all begun. Jesse was already awake, crouched by the fire, scanning the horizon with the same intensity that had carried them through countless close calls. "This is it," he said softly as she stepped into the morning light. "We ride to the river. It's the one place no one would expect us to be. If we make it there, we can finally plan our next move together." Clara nodded, heart pounding, her resolve as sharp as the morning air. She had come to understand the truth of their lives. Love in the West was not gentle, and freedom was never safe. Every choice carried a risk, and yet the thought of being with Jesse, of standing beside him no matter the danger, made the risk worth taking. They rode hard, the landscape opening into wide plains dotted with sagebrush and twisted mesquite. Jesse's knowledge of hidden paths and secret trails carried them far ahead of any pursuers, or so they hoped. The wind whipped at Clara's hair, tugging at the edges of her hat, and the horses' hooves kicked up clouds of dust that shimmered in the dawn light. As they neared the riverbank, the familiar shimmer of water came into view. The trees leaned close to the current, leaves whispering in the breeze. It was a sanctuary, a place apart from the law, from bounty hunters, from the weight of every expectation they had ever known. But even as they dismounted and approached the water, Jesse's sharp eyes caught movement. From the far bank, a contingent of men appeared, deputies and bounty hunters alike, tipped off to their location. Their horses stamped and snorted, guns raised, eyes fixed on the two figures who had dared to escape them for days. Clara's stomach lurched, but she did not flinch. Jesse's hand found hers, and for a moment, their fingers interlaced, a silent affirmation that they would face whatever came together. "Clara," he whispered, "stay close. Whatever happens, we move as one." The men approached, shouting commands, the sound echoing across the water. Clara's mind raced. There was no escape this time, not through hidden trails, not through canyons or crevices. Yet in the river's gentle murmur, she found clarity. She would not allow fear to dictate her choices. Jesse's eyes met hers. A spark of resolve and desperation. "We have to stand our ground," he said. "Not because we want to fight, but because we're not running anymore. Not from them, and not from each other." Clara nodded. They stepped forward together, emerging from the shadow of the trees. The river flowed between them and the approaching men, its gentle current a silent witness to their courage. Jesse's hand rested on the grip of his revolver, but he made no move to draw it. Clara's hand mirrored his, steady and unwavering. The men stopped at the riverbank, uncertainty flickering across their faces. No one had expected the outlaw and the sheriff's daughter to confront them so openly. Standing side by side, Jesse Thorne, the lead deputy, barked, "You're coming with us." Now, Jesse's jaw tightened. "Not like this," he said quietly, and Clara understood. There would be no surrender here, no concessions. Their hearts had already spoken in the quiet of the river nights. In the stolen moments beneath the stars, Clara stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "You can take him, but not without me." The deputies exchanged looks, unprepared for the sheer determination in her tone. The sheriff's daughter, raised on law and order, was defying it in a way that left no room for negotiation. The moments stretched, tense and fragile. And then Jesse did something unexpected. He knelt beside Clara, lowering his gaze to hers. "We walk forward together," he said softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." They stepped into the river, water swirling around their boots, the current cool and grounding. The deputies hesitated at the bank, uncertain whether to follow or wait. In that instant, the river became more than water, it became a symbol. A boundary they refused to cross alone. The sun climbed higher, glinting off the rippling surface. The two hearts that had confessed their truths by this river so many nights ago now stood unshaken, united against the world. Fear existed, danger existed, and the law was relentless, but for Clara and Jesse, none of it could sever the bond that had formed in whispers and glances, in the quiet defiance of the West. At last, the lead deputy lowered his gun, motioning for his men to stand down. A tense pause hung over the river, broken only by the gentle rush of water. And then, slowly, the men turned and rode back the way they had come, leaving the outlaw and the sheriff's daughter alone once more. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Jesse pulled her close, their foreheads touching, the warmth of their bodies a sanctuary against the harshness of the world outside. "By the river," he murmured, echoing the memory of that first night, "our hearts spoke." And now, Clara smiled, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Now they've chosen. The sun glinted on the river's surface, golden and eternal. Around them, the desert stretched endlessly, harsh and unforgiving. But in the quiet of the riverbank, in the shared breath and steady heartbeat of two souls, the West could no longer dictate their fate. For Clara Hawthorne and Jesse Thorne, love had become their law. And by the river, beneath the vast expanse of sky, they were finally free.